He had served on several service commissions and made a significant impact as an independent senator for some 15 years.
When I entered Parliament as an independent senator in 1986, up to the end of 1991, I moved several motions. I moved a motion to examine the common entrance results and to see where the defects are in terms of social class deficits, gender deficits, and ethnic deficits. That is to create a more equitable system of output. And that was done, and it also led to the establishment of the Center for Ethnic Studies, which eventually undertook that study. I also moved a motion to re-examine the death penalty and create a clear-cut policy. That too was accepted in Parliament through private motion.
In the Senate, he chaired several joint select committees, debated a wide range of bills, and moved several noteworthy motions.
I took an active part in moving private motions, which, thankfully, to the government and opposition side, were supportive. One in particular was the motion to broadcast live the full proceedings of Parliament. There were news stories captured on television before, but to have continuous broadcast of the proceedings, I moved a motion that broadcast be live. They accepted the motion and set up a joint select committee chaired by Mr. Dr. Keith Rowley. Keith Rowley was chairman of the joint select committee that operationalized the motion into the life that it has now.
I found him to be a very effective speaker. He was a good debater, and he was eloquent, he was knowledgeable. Whenever he had to take part in the debate, he was well prepared. He did not indulge in name-calling or character assassination. He did not in any way violate the standing orders. I enjoyed listening to him and to hearing what he had to say, because on many occasions I find that I could have learned something from him.
Although his last term in the Senate ended in 2010, Professor Dhanayshar still serves as an advocate of the people. In 2011, he was appointed chairman of the Police Service Commission, where he continued to share his expertise in criminology and public safety. Best remembered as an independent thinker, Professor Ramesh Dhanayshar contribution to academics and national service entered the public records when, in 2013, he received this country's highest honor, the Order of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as a supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and the prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator Anita Haynes, who is out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from His Excellency the President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Brian Beek. Whereas Senator Anita Haynes is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Brian Begg, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 12th of December 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Anita Haynes, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 12th day of December 2017. Honorable Senators, a Senator is required to take the oath.
I, Brian Begg, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Brought from the House of Representatives, the Finance Bill 2017 in the name of the Minister of Finance.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 62(1)(b), I beg to move that the next stage of the bill be taken later in the proceedings.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the next stage of the bill be taken later in the proceedings. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The next stage of the bill will be taken later in the proceedings.
Petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Madam President, I have the honour to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The annual audited financial statements of Invest TT Limited for the financial years ended September 30, 2015 and 2016. The report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago to the High Court pursuant to Section 44E7 of the Central Bank Act, Chapter 7902 for the quarter ended September 30, 2017. The audited financial statements of the University of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended September 30, 2014. Thank you, Madam President.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you. Madam President, I have the honour to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper and supplemental order paper in my name. The annual administrative report of the Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited, ETEC, for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2015. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Trade and Industry to the fourth report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11th Parliament, of the examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. Thank you.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers listed on the order paper in my name. The annual report of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago for the year 2015 and 2016. Thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the supplemental order paper in the name of the Minister of Public Utilities. The annual administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Solid Waste Management Company Limited, SWMCOL, for the period October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the supplementary order paper in my name. The second ministerial response of the Ministry of Works and Transport to the eighth report of the Public Accounts Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11th Parliament, on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on a special audit of the Public Transport Service Corporation. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers listed on the supplemental order paper in my name. The response of the Auditor General's Department to the fourth report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11th Parliament, on the examination of the system of internal audits within the public service.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, and in my own name. The annual administrative report of the Ministry of Community Development for fiscal year 2014-2015, the administrative report of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2015.
Reports from committees, urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. In light of reports that some farmers are owed a total of $1.9 million by the National Flour Mills for rice supplied to the company, can the Minister inform this Senate when will the rice farmers be paid their outstanding monies?
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I'm informed by National Flour Mills that by December 31st, 2017, it would process a payment of $1 million towards the $1.9 million
which is said to be owed to the farmers. And in 2018, in the first quarter, the second payment would be made to the farmers. Thank you.
Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister. Minister, could you advise this Honourable House what mechanisms you intend to put in place to avoid a repetition of this development in the future?
Senator Mark, that question does not arise. Next question, next supplemental. Okay.
Questions for oral answer.
Madam President, I am pleased to announce that the government will be answering all the questions for oral answers, which is listed here as 4. And for written answers, we are pleased to announce we will be answering question 21, 23, 36, and 38, even though 36 and 38 is not due, but we have them, so we will lay them. And we crave the indulgence of Senator Mark on question number 13, seeing that we had already asked for a 2-week deferral, but we will all admit that it is a voluminous request, and we are working assiduously on this, and we hope to have it ready at the next sitting of this Honourable Senate.
Senator Mark? Question?
All 4 questions?
Yes.
Yeah, question number 1 to the Honourable Minister of Health.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Ministry of Education has implemented several strategies, programs to address the issue of teenage pregnancy in schools. Health and the Family Life Education Program. The Health and the Family Education Life Program is organized around 4 themes aligned with CARICOM regional standards. They are self and interpersonal relationships, sexuality and sexual health, eating and fitness, managing the environment. An integral module is related to sexuality and sexual health education. This is geared to ensure that students gain the knowledge necessary to clarify societal beliefs and so become comfortable with their own sexuality. This module also provides students with the knowledge and skills to deal with the changes associated with puberty, life skills to promote healthy lifestyles, and be responsible for sexual behaviors. They will understand and accept themselves as unique sexual beings with special needs and become aware of changes and challenges as they go through life. At-risk youths can benefit from exposure to lessons based on topics such as changes associated with puberty, understanding sexuality and managing sexual relations, lifestyle diseases, including non-communicable diseases, and sexually transmitted infections, teenage pregnancy, and early parenthood, physical and sexual abuse, drug abuse. A number of additional programs geared towards the reduction of pregnancy among students are also implemented by the Students Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education. These include Carnival Safety Program. This program is offered for the 4 weeks leading up to Carnival each year at both primary and secondary school. The purpose of this program is to educate students about being aware and safe at Carnival time. It includes topics on appropriate attire, behavior, and provides other pertinent information. Good Touch, Bad Touch. This program targets students at the primary school level where they are made aware of what is a good touch and what is a bad touch. They are also given information on what to do if they experience a bad touch. This initiative is delivered in the months of January and February each year. Personal identity. Each year, this module is delivered at the primary and early secondary school levels during the period September to December. This unit in the curriculum covers puberty, emotional change and development at adolescence, coping with developmental changes, understanding self as a sexual being, understanding one's body that is special. Social issues. This area forms part of the curriculum offered at the secondary and upper primary school levels. It is usually taught throughout the academic year, September to June, to include topics such as HIV/AIDS, STDs, STIs, sexual abuse, rape and incest, sexual grooming, sexual harassment, safety, teenage pregnancy, parenting, absenteeism and truancy, sex and sexuality, puberty, STIs, HIVs, coping with peer pressure. The Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education also provides support for students who become pregnant. Once the cases are identified, the standard procedure for dealing with teenage pregnancies is then followed by the SSD personnel. For example, initiate preliminary assessment to identify needs, family support, educational, financial, and other social needs. Depending on the needs identified.
Minister, your time is up. Senator Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Could I ask the Honourable Minister whether those strategies outlined by the Honourable Minister, are those strategies delivering the results that you would like as Minister as it concerns the reduction of teenage pregnancies on an annual basis in Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister of Education.
I would really like to see the absence of teenage pregnancies in our schools. However, that is not the case. What has been happening is that because of the intervention of our Student Support Services Division, we have seen some reduction in the area of teenage pregnancies. As I said before, we would like the day to come where there will be no teenage pregnancies in our schools. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Yes, Madam Vice President, through you, could the Honourable Minister indicate whether he is satisfied with the level of personnel and infrastructure available to the Student Intervention Support Services Unit as it relates to providing students who become pregnant with the kind of services required?
Minister.
Madam President, yes, I'm satisfied that at the Ministry of Education, our Students Support Services Division is well equipped to handle cases like this, and they have been doing an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Given the composition of the programs you explained earlier, can you indicate if you had any consultation with the religious boards, and if so, what was the response thus far in some of these programs, which are in basically sex ed programs?
No, Senator, I mean, that question is not allowed. You can ask another. Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice, Madam President, could the Honourable Minister provide to this House any data as it relates to the number or the reduction given the application of these strategies over the last, let's say, 18 months in terms of teenage pregnancies?
Minister of Education.
Madam President, I'm sure everyone here is aware that at this point, I will not be able to provide information that Senator Mark is asking. Perhaps I can make that available to him sometime in the future.
One more, Senator Mark.
Madam President, could the Honourable Minister provide us, through you, with a specific time frame for the provision of the data that we have requested?
Minister?
Yes, I'll be happy to provide that information within 1 month.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 7 to the Honourable Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service will continue to use all means available to eliminate illegal activities that threaten the security of our people and our nation as a whole. The following are some of the heightened security protocols being employed by the prison service. 1, increased level of searches of visitors. While there are strict rules pertaining to what can and cannot be brought into the prisons, persons are always seeking new ways to deceive prison security. As such, all security protocols with respect to visits have been tightened and visitors are thoroughly searched when entering prison establishments. Body scanners and handheld scanners have been placed at all prison institutions to reveal contraband concealed on the body or in the body cavity. Additionally, all vehicles entering and leaving the prisons are subject to systematic inspections. In this regard, the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service is supported by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with assistance from the Trinidad and Tobago Police K9 Unit. Secondly, the use of technology as a preventive measure. All prisons have been outfitted with CCTV cameras which provide enhanced security. These cameras boost the surveillance capacity and capability of the prison service. Further, Madam President, the jammers and grabbers system, which was installed to curb cell phone use, has been upgraded to provide a better quality of service. In an effort to further reduce the use of illicit cell phones, all prisons have been outfitted with monitored telephones for use by the inmates. Thirdly, increased frequency of searches of the prison population. Prison officers have amplified the frequency with which they conduct random and special searches of the prison population. These searches are strategic as well as surgical and often lead to the seizure of prohibited items. Fourth, strict observance of internal protocols. Prison officers are debarred from entering any of the nation's prison institutions with bulky bags or passes. This is in an effort to ensure that prison officers themselves do not contravene, knowingly or otherwise, the prison service code of conduct and become guilty of misconduct in office. Fifth and finally, improve inspection and oversight mechanisms. There has been a marked increase in the number of visits to prison institutions by senior officers, which has been mandated by the Commissioner of Prisons. This initiative, Madam President, is aimed at ensuring the prison officers adhere to high standards required of them. Further, there has also been an increased number of armed personnel positioned at all prisons' entrances and at strategic points, and increased patrols around the perimeter of all prisons, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, in terms of the use of technology, as announced by the Honourable Minister, could he share with this Senate what has been the impact of the use of illegal cell phone via the use of the jammer and grabber technology? Could the Honourable Minister indicate to this House whether there has been a major reduction in the use of cell phones to communicate with elements outside of the prison walls over the last, let's say, 18 months that you have observed, that you'd like to share with us?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, as a result of the initiatives adopted by the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service, there has been a reduction in the use of cell phones, and in fact, the deterrent measures are working quite successfully, Madam President.
Senator Ramdeen.
Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, can you indicate during your time as Minister of National Security how many officers, prison officers, have been charged for misbehaviour, for bringing illegal items or involved in bringing illegal items into our nation's prisons?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, I cannot give the exact figures, but there have been officers who have been charged during my time with misconduct in the prison system, and they're subject to disciplinary action, either before the courts or subject to the disciplinary measures adopted by the by the Public Service Commission, under which jurisdiction they fall.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, Madam President, could the Honourable Minister provide this Senate with any data as it concerns the reduction in the use of cell phone in the prisons, given the kind of measures that the ministry would have taken to reduce the use of same?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, the data can be provided at a later date. In terms of quantifying or qualifying the amount that, as requested by Senator Mark, that can certainly be provided at a later date. The data is there, but I don't have it at my hand right now.
Senator Ramdeen.
Madam President, thank you again. To the Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, you indicated that the state prisons are now equipped with CCTV cameras. Is it, the question I have to ask you, is it that all of the divisions in the respective prisons, meaning the maximum security prison, the Golden Grove prison, and the Port of Spain prison I'm speaking about, not Carrera, are the divisions of the prison equipped with CCTV cameras to monitor what happens in the different divisions of the prison?
Minister.
Madam President, I have been informed by the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Commissioner that there, in fact, one prison right now, there's a work in progress. They're actually completing the work done in one of the prisons right now, but all the others are equipped with CCTV cameras. So in terms of completeness, there's still a work in progress, outfitting all the other prisons.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can I ask the Honourable Minister if he can provide the Senate with a time frame for the provision of the data that you don't have available at this time? Read the reduction in the use of cell phone by prisoners. Could you provide us with a time frame that you can provide the data showing the reduction?
Minister.
Madam President, that can be provided within 1 month's time.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Prime Minister, question number 8.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The following measures are being implemented to protect the nation's children from physical and emotional abuse. Ongoing monitoring and response to cases of child abuse by the Children's Authority, recruitment of additional staff to strengthen the ability of the Children's Authority to respond to cases, development of an interagency child emergency response protocol by the Children's Authority, 200,000 anti-child abuse text messages with reporting contact numbers were sent to mobile devices throughout the nation, execution of over 16 anti-abuse related radio and television information dissemination interviews focusing on the signs of abuse, signs of abuser and referral information, the installation of nine anti-child abuse messages on 9 buses nationwide, featuring anti-abuse paintings by children with abuse reporting information, additional buses to be branded, ongoing nationwide anti-child abuse information fairs, radio, TV, newspaper advertisements on child abuse are executed on an ongoing basis. In collaboration with UNICEF and the Trinidad and Tobago Cricket Board, over 100 coaches and police officers were trained on how to identify child abuse and how to respond to reports of suspicion of child abuse. In collaboration with UNICEF and PTSC, 174 buses, taxis, maxi-taxi drivers were trained on child abuse, distributed 2 extra large information posters on the types of child abuse and how to access help to all health facilities and primary and secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago, distributed over 10,000 child rights books to primary schools, over 7,000 information brochures distributed to general public on child abuse, currently developing in collaboration with UNICEF a variety of child abuse brochures and stickers targeted at school-age children, preschool, primary school, and secondary school, development of the National Child Policy to protect all children through interministerial collaboration, development of the National Children's Registry, installing informational signs of child abuse throughout Trinidad and Tobago, education of students in Tobago on the types of child abuse, followed by anti-abuse murals created in various communities, 200,000 foster care flyers mailed across Trinidad and Tobago in an attempt to recruit more foster carers who can provide stable family environments to children in need of care and protection, expansion of the Children's Authority into Tobago, including an assessment center and place of safety, establishment of additional assessment centers across Trinidad, including Sandy Grande, South and Central Trinidad, continuous licensing of community residences to ensure standardized quality of care to the nation's children, a 26-week training program conducted by OPM and Children's Authority to enhance the capacity and skill set of caregivers in children's homes, sessions including children's psychological health for trauma, communicating with children, skills, child protection, behavioral management, and Trinidad and Tobago children's rights and laws. We are signatory to the multi-agency protocol with the Juvenile Court Project, Children's Court, which will ensure streamlined interventions for children in conflict with the law, execution of a national baseline on public perceptions of child protection issues, led by the authority's research team, presentations on what is child abuse, signs of abuse, identifying an okay touch and a not okay touch, how to protect oneself from abuse to primary and secondary school students, parent-teacher associations, children at the National Library, during school holiday camp counselors, parents of children who are members of the Police Youth Club, and health and family life education teachers, and radio features, aired and interviews conducted on family life, child development, and child abuse. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, in light of the various measures outlined by the Honorable Minister aimed at reducing children's or child abuse, physical and emotional, could the Honorable Minister indicate to us whether he can provide us with any measurable data or statistics that would tell this Parliament that there has been a reduction given the implementation of the various measures outlined by the Honorable Minister?
Minister in the office.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I'm sure the appropriate question directed for a written answer, that information can be provided by the Office of the Prime Minister and the Children's Authority.
Senator Mark.
Yeah. Madam President, could the Honorable Minister indicate how many new staff members have been recruited by the Children's Authority over the last, let's say, 12 months, having regard to what he has said?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam, once again, the appropriate question, we're seeking a written answer to that, because what we're being asked here is what measures were implemented to protect the children from physical and emotional abuse.
Is someone, Senator Mark, you have another supplementary?
Yes.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I must express appreciation, Madam President, for the very comprehensive answer given by the Minister. I was keen to hear with regards to the list of the schools, that you distributed books. And my question is whether you had, what method you used in terms of choosing the schools that you distributed. If you can provide, for instance, a list of the schools that received the books and perhaps indicate how you came up with deciding on those schools.
Minister, may I just ask that when you are putting a question, a supplementary question, that it be specific and focused. Okay, Minister?
Thank you very much. Madam President, the answer is the books, which are child rights books, over 10,000 of them were distributed to all primary schools. So the category is all primary schools.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 9 to the Honorable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, following my receipt of the internal audit report, Petrotrin commissioned a forensic audit by Cruel Consulting Canada Limited Company and a reservoir audit by Gaffney Klein and Associates on the matter. Both reports have been completed and are now before the board of Petrotrin, who are taking legal advice on the matter. I await the outcomes of the deliberations of the board of directors and the recommendations arising from the investigation to determine what action is required of me as line minister.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, to the Minister of Energy, in light of the gravity of the findings and recommendations contained in the internal reports, particularly one that has now been made public, can the Minister indicate whether, with the additional reports, whether there is going to be a time frame established for action to be taken on the recommendations that would have been advanced by the two additional reports?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam President, the Board of Petrotrin, through its chairman, has indicated that they prefer to take correct action than to be quick. They are seeking legal advice, and should I say senior counsel advice on this matter, so it would be imprudent of me to give them a time frame. But I hope sooner rather than later.
Senator Ramdeen.
Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister of Energy. Minister, could you give us the date, or are you aware of the date on which Petrotrin sought this legal advice from senior counsel, as you indicated, or the board, sorry?
I'm not sure of the specific date, but it was post the receipt of the Cole report.
Senator Mark.
Would the Honourable Minister wish to share with this Parliament the name of the senior counsel that has been retained by Petrotrin to offer this legal advice on those reports?
Minister.
I cannot so do at this time, Madam President.
Madam President, would the Minister be minded to provide this Honourable Senate with copies of the reports that you have mentioned, both the Kroll report and the Gaffney and Klein report, seeing that the gravity of the matter affects every citizen of this republic?
Minister.
Madam President, as we said in the debate on last Tuesday, as far as Petrotrin is concerned, the report is confidential and privileged, so I cannot comply with that request.
Senator Mark.
In light of the privileged nature of the report, could the Honourable Minister indicate that in the public interest, whether the government intends to have a meeting with the board of Petrotrin through the line minister to ensure that action is taken on the recommendations of those reports so that the public could be satisfied, Madam President, that things are moving forward?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question. Senator Richards.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm presuming the questions, the supplementals on that last question is over.
I'm sorry?
I'm presuming the supplementals my question is not related to the last question.
It's on question number 9, isn't it?
No, it's just a different matter, Madam President.
No, well then, I can't,
Oh, sorry, okay.
Yeah. I'm allowing supplementary questions on question number 9. That's it.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister, public business, government business, bills second reading.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Variation of Certain Duties and Taxes and to Introduce Provisions of a Fiscal Nature and for Related Matters be now read a second time. Madam President, the Finance Bill 2017 seeks to introduce some of the measures recently referred to in the recently concluded budget debate. The bill, for the members who would have reviewed it, is a relatively simple and brief bill, the details of which I will go into shortly. But before I do that, I would like, Madam President, to briefly remind the honourable members of the context in which these measures are being introduced. It would be remiss of me not to remind the members of this House that the budget was framed against a continued declining revenues, as well as significant fiscal and external imbalances caused in part by the collapse of the world commodity prices that this administration met when it assumed office. The Trinidad and Tobago economy has faced 3 consecutive years of economic decline caused by a 23% fall in petroleum output between 2013 and 2016, with oil dropping to its lowest level in 50 years in 2016 to 66,000 barrels per day. The general decline in oil production and collapse in oil prices since 2014 has resulted in a severe reduction in government's overall revenue, leading to cuts in expenditure which have impacted construction, manufacturing, and the services sector. Madam President, we have lost $20 billion in annual revenue since 2014 and $2.5 billion in foreign exchange inflows. Madam President, our budgeted revenue for 2018 is predicated on an oil price of $52 and a gas price of $2.75 per MMBTU. It should be noted that our assumed oil price is below the International Monetary Fund's forecast of $56.20 per barrel for 2018 and lower than the current oil price forecast made by the World Bank, United States Energy Information Administration, and International Energy Agency. There has been renewed optimism in the oil price as OPEC rolled over the production cuts until the end of 2018, and this has led to prices remaining consistently above the price at which the budget has been pegged. Research provided on December the 8th, 2017 indicated that on the close date of December 7, 2017, West Texas immediate oil prices were averaging 56.69 cents per 42-gallon barrel, and we remain cautiously optimistic but vigilant, Madam President. And Madam President, just to add that for the past 2 days, the oil price has again been consistently above what the Ministry of Finance pegged as the oil price per the budget figure. So, as I said, we remain cautious but optimistic in terms of the outlook on the oil price and the gas price for the 2018 period. In light of the collapse of the revenues from the petroleum sector and the significant impact on overall government revenue, I wish to remind this Honorable House that while we have made significant inroads into reducing government expenditure by approximately $10 billion, estimated expenditure for 2018 continues to be below estimated revenues, which forces us to borrow to meet the shortfall. I would also remind my honorable colleagues that measures have been put in place and are being put in place to achieve various things in respect of that shortfall. We continue to monitor and reduce waste and unnecessary duplication. We are putting measures or have put measures in place to generate funds to pay down and replace some of the debt that was created, especially this relates to the debt in respect of CL Financial, or created by the CL Financial loan. We have put measures or are putting measures in place to increase revenue. By way of reminder, some of these initiatives include disposal of the CL assets to replace the funds loaned to that group, introduction of the property tax, introduction of the TTR, the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, regulating and adjusting taxes on the gaming sector, which generates approximately $10 billion in economic activity without an appropriate legislative or tax framework, and adjusting the petroleum tax regime. Madam President, since a review of the bill that's before us will indicate that there are no measures currently dealing with the petroleum tax regime, I will just give you an update of where we are on that. Madam President, we have embarked on a long overdue reform of the oil and gas fiscal regime with a view to ensuring consistency in their application, with terms attractive for investment, while at the same time securing a substantial share of the resources for the benefit of the state and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Having done the preliminary work in 2016 and consulted with key stakeholders, we will be establishing a suitable legal and fiscal framework for oil and gas operations, which would promote investment in the energy sector. We have listened and are in broad agreement with the upstream producers that a reform of the supplemental petroleum tax is required. We are satisfied that in a low-price environment and in its present form, the SPT does not facilitate immediate investment. It should be noted that SPT rates can vary from a low of 18% to a maximum of 55%, depending on the price of crude oil, as well as the size, maturity, and location of the oil field, and is triggered when the price increases above $50 per barrel. Although the SPT has a system of credits and discounts and is minimized through deductibility against the petroleum profits tax, its application is not investment friendly in that once a price band is triggered, the new rate applies to all production from the relevant license. I had a meeting just this week, Madam President, with a member of the energy sector and who is contemplating additional investment into that sector. And he brought home to us that the decision that is taken in the legislation which applies in respect of SPT makes all the difference into whether they invest and how much they invest. The Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Energy has accepted that position, and when we bring the provisions with respect to the taxation of the petroleum sector, we will seek to address that issue. So the reform will modify SPT to bring a degree of stability and predictability in terms of the fiscal regime faced by the government and the upstream operators. So, Madam President, having laid the foundation for the bill that is before us, I will get into the measures that are outlined in the bill.
The energy sector. The Minister of Finance did indicate to the country that he was going to impose a 12.5% royalty on oil, condensate, as well as gas, and that was to take effect from the 1st of December. I was wondering if you could clarify and bring the Senate up to date and the country as to where we are. Have the government abandoned that particular mission?
The government has not abandoned that. As I said, the Ministry of Finance will bring legislation to the Parliament in the not-too-distant future to address the taxation of the energy sector, and in that will be the proposed adjustment to the royalty regime. So, Madam President, back to the measures that have been addressed in the finance bill which is before us. The first one I will deal with is the measures in respect of alternative fuel technology. In an attempt, Madam President, to encourage the acquisition and use of fuel-efficient motor vehicles in Trinidad and Tobago, the legislation was changed in the past to grant relief from motor vehicle tax, from customs duty, and from value-added tax on vehicles that fell into 3 classes. They are vehicles manufactured to use compressed natural gas, vehicles that are propelled by electric power, and hybrid vehicles. This relief has been provided and has been operating, but what has been discovered is that there is an abuse in respect of the size of the cars that are benefiting from this relief. The relief was never intended to benefit executive type cars. So what the ministry has sought to do was tidy up the provision to make it abundantly clear who should benefit from these reliefs. So what the provision does is that it restricts the relief on new cars and used cars up to 4 years old in these categories where the engine size for a CNG vehicle and a hybrid vehicle to no more than 1599 cc's, and in respect of an electric vehicle to 159 kilowatts. So there are 3 separate provisions in the legislation dealing separately, in the bill, dealing separately with the relief in respect of motor vehicle tax, in respect of customs duty, and in respect of value-added tax. But they all relate to the same matter, which is why I dealt with them together. However, what the legislation also does is that it makes it abundantly clear that the limitation on engine size will not apply to commercial vehicles until December 31st, 2020. So we are giving the people importing vehicles for the purpose of commercial activity the opportunity to secure the vehicles that they need during now and that period and that date. Madam President, another measure that we're seeking to put in place is an expansion on the relief that applies to agricultural holdings. It currently applies to agricultural holdings under 100 acres. This may have been relevant, that restriction may have been relevant in the time when we had the mega farm, for example, or Carney involved in agriculture, or Texaco Star Farm involved in agriculture. But in these days, when the state or state-owned agencies have moved away from agriculture, we are seeking to encourage not only the small farmers, but also the larger establishments to promote agricultural activity, to reduce the food bill, to increase exportation of food items. We have extended the relief from corporation tax on profits generated by agricultural farms, regardless of the size of those operations. Madam President, another measure that is addressed in this bill is the adjustment in the corporation tax rate. Madam President, a lot of weather has been made of the fact that the allegation rather than fact that the government is seeking to tax itself out of a recession. And as I would have indicated previously, that there's nothing that's further from the truth. There is a 5% increase the corporation tax rate is being harmonized by this legislation. The members would remember that last year there was a 2-stage tax on corporations and individuals. The millionaire tax, it was loosely called, where persons, companies, and individuals earning above $1 million were required to pay 25% on anything below $1 million and 30% on anything above that. What this provision is seeking to do is to harmonize the tax on corporations at 30% on all the profits of the corporation. And the impact of this is that it will increase the maximum increase that a corporation will be required to pay as a result of this measure is $50,000 per annum. That is the maximum burden that will fall on a corporation as a result of this measure. The other impact on the other adjustment to corporation tax rates applies to, you can ask your question during your presentation, I will seek to respond, Senator. The other measure that was introduced in respect of corporation tax rates relates to persons providing banking services and commercial banks, and the rate of tax that will apply to them with effect from 1st of January 2018 is 35% rather than the 25 and 30 that now applies. There's a lottery winnings tax that is also to be introduced. What the ministry has agreed to do was defer the effective date of this tax to a date to be proclaimed, because we have been persuaded that the National Lotteries Board needs time to put measures in place to ensure the smooth operation of this tax. Because what the legislation requires is that 10% of the winnings, not the earnings, but 10% of the winnings being paid out by the National Lottery Board will be withheld as tax and remitted to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which means that people who sell these, who are operating as agents for the National Lotteries Board, have to put measures in place to be able to withhold and remit those taxes. There are penalties that are put in place for failure to do so, and there is an audit system that has been put in place to allow the Board of Inland Revenue to go in and confirm that the taxes that are properly due are remitted to the Board of Inland Revenue. So the effective date of this tax will be a date to be proclaimed by the President when we are satisfied that measures have been put in place to ensure the smooth operation of this tax. Madam President, there's also an environmental tire tax, which is an imposition of a tax of $20 on the majority of tires that are being brought into Trinidad and Tobago. The tax authority for this tax is the Customs and Excise Division. The tax, Madam President, is intended to protect the environment from the ills associated with the disposal of tires. Nothing brought the need for this tax more starkly home to me, Madam President, than when my colleague, the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, presented us, the Cabinet, with a report and an exercise that he had undertaken, a cleanup exercise that he had undertaken earlier this year. Madam President, just to indicate to the population and to my colleagues in this House what we are talking about. I'm sure the Minister will bring the results of this exercise to the attention of the national community in due course. But in respect of tires alone, Madam President, during the course of the campaign, the Minister and his team and the volunteers who he persuaded to get involved in this very useful exercise collected 24,047 tires throughout the country. 24,000 tires that were just thrown to mess, to destroy, and to create unsightliness and to create disease and all the ills to do with that. And tires was just one of the category of refuse and garbage that he would have collected. So, Madam President, if this does not bring home the need for us to deal with our environment on a more systematic and continuous basis, I don't know what will do it. So, Madam President, we have introduced we are seeking to introduce this environmental tire tax to address that ill, and I am hoping that none of my colleagues have a challenge with that proposal. Madam President, I mentioned before that the government does need to fund its shortfall with borrowings. And in light of that, there are two measures in the legislation that seeks to increase the government's ability to borrow in the short term while it addresses the shortfall that is facing. So against the backdrop of a tight cash situation caused in part by falling revenues, the central government has had cause to utilize temporary advances from the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago to meet cash requirements for its budget expenditure. The overdraft facility at the central bank is in accordance with Section 46 of the Central Bank Act. That section, Madam President, allows the central bank to make temporary advances to the government on such terms and conditions as may be agreed upon between the bank and the Minister of Finance. Madam President, the Act provides that the total amount of outstanding advances made under this section must not at any time exceed 15% of that portion of the estimates of annual revenue of the government for the financial year in which the advances were initially made. The annual revenue comprises the sum of total recurrent revenues and capital receipts, exclusive of local and external loans. Madam President, the overdraft has reached, on previous occasions, reached as high as 98% of the legal limit. Given the likelihood of shortfalls in revenue inflows, it is imperative that the government has the option to meet any unforeseen cash flow constraint that may arise during the fiscal year in a timely manner. Madam President, in this regard, it is proposed to increase the limit on the overdraft facility from 15% to 20%. This is expected to minimize the disruption to government's fiscal operations. Madam President, there is also a provision in the Act that seeks to adjust government's borrowing under the Treasury Bills Act from $2 billion to $5 billion. And Madam President, that is the extent of the provisions in the legislation, in the draft bill. As I indicated, the measures are brief and they are relatively simple. I have sought to provide information and background. I trust this has been sufficient for my colleagues, but as I said, I'm willing to address any questions you may have. Madam President, in light of that, it has been my honor to make this presentation. I thank you and beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Variation of Certain Duties and Taxes and to introduce provisions of a fiscal nature and for related matters be now read a second time. Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I listened very carefully to the brief presentation, very short on details, delivered by the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. And I also want to disappoint her from the very outset, because we do not see this measure as a very simple and straightforward exercise. This particular measure that we are dealing with, that is the finance bill, has very, very far-reaching implications, consequences, and repercussions for the Trinidad and Tobago economy. Madam President, I would like, in my contribution, to examine the macroeconomic implications. I also want to look at the debt management issues that would arise out of particular measures. And I'm going to concentrate as far as I can, Madam President, on several, or I would say a few, of the several provisions outlined by the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. I want to say that the amendment to the Central Bank Act, the amendment to the Treasury Bills Act, are two areas that are of grave concern to the United National Congress, and I dare say the citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, in this particular measure before us, the bill with all the amendments, the government has introduced in a very surreptitious way measures that are going to have far-reaching implications for this economy. And they have done it, Madam President, without giving this Parliament the necessary notification via what is called a motion, via a resolution, so we can get a full-scale debate and justification for the actions that the government is proposing in this bill that is before us. So whilst I will touch briefly on the other matters like the road, the tire tax and corporation tax and the inexplicable delay in some of the measures that have not been implemented thus far, we would want to look at the following. The amendment to Section 46, subsection 2 of the Central Bank Act. We would also like later on to examine the amendment to the Treasury Bills Act, Section 2, subsection 1. Madam President, I have been a parliamentarian for a few years in this honorable place. And as the Honorable Minister indicated, the finance bill is supposed to be a subset of the budget. So the budget, the minister announced several measures, taxation measures, to be implemented. But to give legal effect to these measures, Madam President, the minister has to come as he has come today, or the Honorable Minister has come today, to make those legislative changes through the appropriate amendments to various pieces of legislation. I would like to make a distinction, and we would like to make a distinction between a finance bill that is dealing specifically with the implementation of tax measures that were announced in the budget, and a finance bill containing measures that will increase borrowings on the part of the government. I think the government has sought to ambush the Parliament and the parliamentarians and the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, the measures that they have introduced into this finance bill, they did not do it last year when we dealt in 2015-2016. They didn't introduce it like that. And the law is very clear on these matters. So we would want to find out from the government, and Madam President, may I advise you that since the Central Bank Act was established some years ago, and I think I have a copy of it here. It came into being in 1964. How many years?
58 years.
50. Since it was introduced, Madam President, from 64 to now, I do not believe any government, including the NAR, that was under severe economic challenges have tampered with this particular section of the legislation. This PNM government has done something that no other government has done. And Madam President, you know what? They have amended in a very surreptitious way and parachuted it, as I said, in a finance bill when it's supposed to come in a separate motion or a separate bill so that we could have a full-scale debate. The minister was very brief. She offered, the Honorable Minister that is, offered no justification for the measure, apart from saying that the government is raking and scraping and they can't pay their bills, and therefore they are going to borrow from the central bank, and they are going to use what? Treasury bills in an effort to raise short-term financing in order to cover their expenditure. Madam President, that is totally wrong. And we want to serve, we want to warn this government, you know, because when they leave office very shortly, they are leaving a bed of thorns for us to inherit. That is what they are doing, Madam President. Because what they are doing, Madam President, is that they are tampering with a system, and they are tainting a system that has never been designed to be tainted in the way that they are doing it. It has never been designed that way, Madam President. So you know what, Madam President? This measure, which is the central bank amendment measure, is going to give the government $2 billion. It will make available to the government $2 billion roughly in overdraft borrowing facilities at the level of the central bank. So they have now moved, Madam President, from 15% to 20%, given the formula in section 46.2, total recurrent revenue plus capital revenue takes us to about $45 billion. 20% of that takes us close to $9 billion. So, Madam President, we have gone from where it was, 15%, given the current arrangement. That would have been about about 7 billion or thereabouts, and we have now gone to close to 9 billion. The minister has not told us, as a parliament, what the government is going to use that money for. All was told is that it will deal with fiscal operations, Madam President. Madam President, if the government wanted to tamper with the Central Bank Act, if the government wished to tamper, Madam President, with the Treasury Bills Act, why did the Minister of Finance not indicate in his budget speech that he was going to do so? Why the minister, Madam President, did not tell this country he was going to take these measures in the budget of 2017-18? He did not do that. Madam President, not even in the budget debate did the minister whisper, or did he hint that he was going in that direction. But then 2 months after the budget presentation, in a very surreptitious style, they parachuted 2 critical amendments to the finance bill, which we have never been accustomed to. A finance bill is supposed to deal with the taxation measures that have been announced in the budget. And you are not supposed to come and deal with borrowings? How borrowings and taxation, Madam President, square off? That is a separate matter that we are supposed to deal with. But, Madam President, here we are, dealing with these measures as proposed by this government. Madam President, we know we can't vote, meaning we can't stop this legislation, because we are the Senate. But we will call for division. we will not support this obscenity, Madam President, in terms of the parliamentary process. We will not be party to the parachuting into a finance bill of two very critical amendments to the Central Bank Act and the Treasury Bills Act into a finance bill that requires a full-scale debate in this Parliament. Madam President, you would remember in December or November of 2016, we came here and we spent hours upon hours amending the Development Loans Act, the External Loans Act, the Companies Guarantee Loans Act. All these acts we dealt with, and the government increased the ceilings of all those acts. And if the government wanted to tamper with the Treasury Bills Act, they must bring a motion and debate it separately. If they want, Madam President, to increase what no other government has done in 53 years, increase the rate from 15% to 20%, they must bring an amendment to the Central Bank Act and justify why they are doing or why they are proposing what they are proposing, Madam President. But, Madam President, that is not to be. What we are seeing is this approach, this lack of transparency, lack of accountability, lack of openness on the part of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, we reject this approach that the government has taken. It demonstrates, Madam President, desperation, incompetence, lack of proper management, their inability to deal with their cash flow management, Madam President. And I will show a little later on in my presentation where the very IMF, they have now adopted the IMF as their new guru and their advisor. And I'll show you, Madam President, the IMF has frowned upon this approach that the PNM is adopting at this time. Madam President, we are of the view that the government of this country is taking this society down a very dangerous path. So you are increasing, Madam President, as I said, this arrangement from 46, under Section 46 rather, from 15 to 20%. Madam President, you are going to get $2 billion more. Madam President, you would recall the fiscal deficit for 2016 was 12.1%. The International Monetary Fund is projecting an 11.1% deficit in 2017. And we are in the negative zone in terms of fiscal deficits until 2022, according to projections from the International Monetary Fund. So Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, is in what is called the negative zone between 2017 until 2022. And what this government is doing, Madam President, they are increasing, as I said, that arrangement where they can go and access loan, a temporary loan from the central bank through the overdraft facilities that they condemned. They condemned the People's Partnership for going into the central bank and borrowing. And they say, Madam President, reaching what is called the limit. And at one time they said the country was running on fumes. Madam President, now we are told by the minister that we have reached, in terms of the current arrangement, Madam President.
Members, please. I want to remind members of Standing Order 51(1), E, and F. Please read it, refresh your memory on it, and please abide by it. Continue, Senator Ma.
So, Madam President, we are in a situation where we are going into fiscal deficits on a large scale. And the IMF, in its Article 4 consultation, has revealed that we are going to be faced with fiscal deficit up to 2022 at 8% of GDP. That is what they are predicting. That is a healthy sign, Madam President. These are negative numbers for us to pay attention to. So you have a ballooning of the fiscal deficit, Madam President. At the same time, we have crossed the 60% benchmark in terms of debt to GDP, which we know is a danger zone. We are now close to 64% of debt to GDP, Madam President. And the International Monetary Fund is predicting that we are going to be close to about 85 to 100% by the year 2022. That is where we are heading, Madam President. So how can the government use this mechanism that they would like to tell us is the way forward when they have cash flow problems, when they can't meet their bills or satisfy their payments? They will dip into this loan arrangement, this overdraft facility, and increase that limit from 15% to 20%, Madam President. Madam President, you know what is very alarming? We also need to get from the Minister of Finance in this House, the Minister and the Ministry of Finance. What is the amount of arrears or the amount of monies that are owed to the central bank at this time? What is the amount of money owed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago? We need to get some answers to that question, Madam President. Madam President, we cannot support a measure that is going to lead to a situation where the government is going to crowd out the private sector. Because what we have here with the Treasury Bills Act is that the government is going to use what is called a short-term instrument, which is the Treasury Bill or Bills Act. And they are going to go to the central bank, Madam President, and ask the central bank to be their agent. And the central bank will go out there and borrow on what is called the Treasury Bills Act. Who are they going to borrow money from, Madam President? They are going to borrow monies from the bankers, from the insurance companies, from those big companies that invest whenever you have these loans or these loans that are being raised. So we are being told by the Minister of Finance, Madam President, that, you know what? He brought down some members of the Commonwealth, and they discovered, Madam President, magically, that, you know what? Rather than pay 4.7% interest on overdraft facilities at the central bank through the overdraft borrowing mechanism, you know what, Madam President? We can now access what is called Treasury bills. And that would be a cheaper mechanism to raise funds in order to finance government's operations in Trinidad and Tobago. But, Madam President, it was never the intention of the framers of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, especially the Treasury Bills Act, to allow the government to use the Treasury Bills Act as an instrument for financing government fiscal operations. It was never the intention of the framers. Madam President, we are talking about monetary policy and we're talking about the central bank. And this is about liquidity management. We are talking about a concept called open market operations. And what the central bank does, Madam President, is that they use the Treasury Bills Act and the Treasury Notes Act in order to tighten liquidity whenever there's excess liquidity in the system. That is what that instrument is used for. It is not designed to finance government expenditure. That is not the purpose of the Treasury Bills Act. So the government is corrupting the system. They are polluting the system. They are contaminating the system. And how can we, as parliamentarians, support that? We cannot support that infiltration and pollution and contamination of the process, Madam President. Madam President, let me also share with you another concern. The private sector is already being punished in an environment where they are being heavily taxed. You are going to have a lot of job losses. You're going to have closures of companies and businesses. You're going to have increased prices. But on top of that, Madam President, the government is seeking to crowd out the market, crowd out the private sector from the market. Because when the government goes out there through the central bank and they raise loans through the Treasury Bills Act, Madam President, initially you might get it at 1.5%. You might get it at 2%, Madam President. How long is that going to be sustained for? Madam President, we are predicting that the very Treasury Bills Act that is attracting just about 2% or 2.5% on instruments for 6 months and maybe a max of 1 year will increase to 3 to 4 and even the 5%. And what it will mean is that the private sector will now be calling, through the banks rather, will be calling for higher interest when these private sector business people approach them for loans. So we are going to have, Madam President, an increase in the rate of interest or the price of money because of the decision that the government has taken. This decision, Madam President, has not been properly thought out because it will have a negative impact on this economy. It will increase, as I said, Madam President, the instability of this nation, especially at the macroeconomic level. Madam President, whether it is the balance of payments, the external accounts of our country, current, and the balance of trade, and the overall balance of payments, we are now in a negative zone. There are no surpluses in that region, Madam President. And then when you combine that now with the fiscal accounts.
Senator Mark, you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, when you combine that with the fiscal accounts, Madam President. Oh, you mean that's my first 30 minutes? Because only started at 25 to 3, you know. So you must be saying my first 30 minutes. Because I have 40 minutes. No, I started at 25 to 3, ma'am. Yeah, I'm supposed to go at 3:15, Madam President. I don't think you want to shortchange me today. I think I should take some time from the minister.
Senator Mark, my apologies. Yes, I am so sorry. You are quite correct. Yes, so my apologies.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you if I could have borrowed some of the Minister of Finance's time, seeing that she was so short and brief. I could have really done with some of her time. Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the question that we have to ask, there is a former governor called Ewart Williams, who is advising the Minister of Finance at this time. We would like to know if Mr. Ewart Williams is the architect of those pieces of advice as a former governor. Has Ewart Williams advised the Minister of Finance to amend the Central Bank Act and also to amend the Treasury Bills Act? Madam President, we also would like to know whether the Minister of Finance has been in consultation with the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, who is now the current chairman of the Economic Development Board, one Dr. Terence Farrell. Because I'm sure Dr. Terence Farrell will not advise the government to go down that particular route, Madam President. So we are very, very concerned, Madam President, about this approach that the government is taking. It is demonstrating, Madam President, as I said, total incompetence of an administration that told this country they were ready and they were ready, Madam President. Where is the evidence of that today? Madam President, even the minister had to admit that we are now in the third consecutive year of negative economic growth. We recorded 0.5% in 2014, 0.5% in 2015. We went to almost 7% in 2016. And it is predicted that we will be somewhere in the vicinity of 3.5% in 2017. In 2018, we get another breather. The IMF is predicting we might get a 2.8%. All that is based on energy projects and initiatives that the People's Partnership took when it was in office in 2015. So it was based on our initiatives that you have more gas being pumped, Madam President, and therefore we are going to earn more revenues as a result. Madam President, as I am saying, as I have said, Madam President, it is wrong. It is wrong, Madam President, for what the government is doing. The government is approaching this whole question about the economic management of the country without a plan. If the government does not have an economic plan, a comprehensive economic strategy to bring about renewal and recovery and growth and transformation, Madam President, where are we going? The government, Madam President, has been a total failure in this country. They have brought no relief to the country. All around, the country is collapsing. On the economic front, we are collapsing. On the social front, we are collapsing. People are living in total fear in this country, Madam President. So, Madam President, when we examine this thing, Madam President, may I invite you to join me? And I want to invite the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Allyson West, Senator that is, to read a paper. It's called the IMF Working Paper. It is entitled Central Bank Credit to the Government. What can we learn from international practices? It was produced by a team of IMF writers, and it was published in January of 2012. Hear what the IMF has told the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Because this was written for the government. Because they are in a road or they are on a path, Madam President, that is in complete contradiction and opposition to what the IMF has said in their working paper. Hear what the IMF has advanced, Madam President, on this question. They did this paper, and here what are the key findings arising out of it. One, in most advanced countries, central banks do not finance government expenditure. You understand that?
Read that again.
I want you to, Madam President, I like the Honorable Senator Allyson West, who is the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, to take note of this IMF recommendation based on their findings. Because they like the IMF. Most of their measures are IMF-driven and IMF-inspired. So follow the IMF. The IMF is saying, Madam President, in most advanced countries, central banks do not finance government expenditure. Two, in a large number of emerging and developing countries, short-term financing is allowed in order to smooth out tax revenue fluctuation. So it is a purely temporary measure. This government wants to make it a permanent arrangement, Madam President. Three, in most countries, the terms and conditions of these loans are typically established by law, such that the amount is capped at a small proportion of annual government revenues. And loans are priced at market interest rates, and their maturity falls within the same fiscal year. Madam President, it is loans at market rates. the government going to the central bank to raise treasury notes so that the interest rate would be less than 2%. So they are using the central bank as a mechanism to raise capital, to raise money at a cheap interest rate and undermining the credibility and autonomy of the Central Bank of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to know what the governor of the Central Bank is doing. Is the governor of the Central Bank sleeping? Or has the Central Bank, under this new governor, become an arm of the Ministry of Finance? Is that what's going on, Madam President? Where is the advice? Where is the advice from the Central Bank governor to the government of this country to let them know that they're on the wrong road? Madam President, may I go on? The fourth finding. In the vast majority of countries, financing other areas of state, such as provincial governments and public enterprises, is not allowed. That is the fourth finding, Madam President. So here it is, the International Monetary Fund is telling the government, even if you want to go in that road, Madam President, it must be for short-term purposes only. And that percentage should be so small. And Madam President, we are at 15%. The IMF is saying between 10 and 20%. The government has gone the full 20% as recommended by the IMF, when we already had a 15% benchmark, which was too high at any rate. So, Madam President, we on this side of the House are very concerned about where this country is heading under this administration. And I saw something in the newspapers, and I believe, Madam President, it was used as a justification for what the minister introduced in terms of the two measures. The minister, who appears to be sleeping on the job and recently was awoken, discovered that we had to meet, Madam President.
Senator Mark, you now have 5 more minutes.
Yes, thank you. We had to meet an obligation to Japan through a creditor who has bought a lot of currencies through swaps, and it was $660 million. And then he gave another swap as an example. And then he went to another one. He said all occurred under who? Kwaitong. Next one occurred under Yetman. And the other one occurred under Hawaii. Madam President, these are complex. These are derivatives. These are complex instruments. You have to depend on technical advice from the ministry technocrats. This is not something that a minister decides upon. You have to get advice on these matters. But the way the minister made it look as if it was Kwaitong who did it, or Yetman who did it, or Hawaii who did it. Madam President, I just want to say that we cannot support this measure in its current form. We find it repulsive, obscene, unacceptable, inexcusable, and indefensible. We cannot, and it's almost bordering on illegality. Madam President, I want to ask the minister 2 final questions before I take my seat. In the budget document for the hybrid and the electric cars, they gave in the budget a deadline of October. And they said there was a moratorium for those who transporting cars on the seas, 31st of December. What we have discovered is that in this legislation before us, there is no moratorium, there is no deadline of October the 25th or thereabout. And you know what's the new deadline, Madam President? The 1st of January. It's gone from the 31st of December to the 1st of January. That could make a big difference. Because if their financiers are importing cars, and those cars are coming in here on the 1st of January, they will not have to pay the taxes. So I want the minister to explain to us how this this thing took place. And Madam President, may I also ask the Honorable Minister to tell us about these tires briefly. My understanding is that when you look at the environmental tire tax, and you look at the numbers that they gave us, and as an example, 4 to 12, 20, 10. Madam President, we have done some research, and the research is showing that these are retreaded tires. These are not new tires. And is this measure not designed to attract an environmental tax for all tires? Why is the government only targeting used tires? So all the new tires are escaping. So could the minister explain to this parliament why you have left off new tires? Because it is not here in the legislation, Madam President. So we want to know. And the final thing I want to ask the Honorable Minister is this, Madam President. If we are so concerned about the environment as the Honorable Minister strained her voice in saying a short while ago, why are you taking the monies that are paid on these tires and putting the money into the consolidated fund? Madam President, why don't you put the funds that are collected into a special arrangement, Madam President, so that swim call can be responsible for recycling or whatever, and there is a fund available? I think the government is fooling the country. And if you're serious about the environment, we challenge you to ratify the Rome, the climate agreement. Huh? The Paris Climate Agreement. Why don't you ratify the Paris Climate Agreement? Why have you? All you did, Madam President, was to sign it, but you have forgotten to ratify it. How are you going to be monitored? The Minister of Trade has been a total failure when it comes to trade in this country. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs and CARICOM Affairs must take responsibility for the failure of the government not ratifying that matter at this time. Madam President, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to these matters, and I hope that the Honourable Minister will be able to clear the air on some of these issues that we have raised in the interest of the public and the people of TNT. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Madam President and colleagues on the independent bench. Madam President, let me place in context this particular finance bill. Because, Madam President, Senator Mark, of course, is right. The finance bill is really meant to put into effect the measures which were announced in a budget presentation and, of course, which requires certain amendments to the laws. But when the budget was presented in September, or earlier, or recently, the budgeted oil price was $52 per barrel. What has happened over the last few months is that this agreement arose between Russia and OPEC, and we are seeing rig counts being reduced in the United States. And today, WTI is trading at 58. Brent at 65, and so I estimate that if that Russia-OPEC agreement were to hold for the rest of the year as they have committed, the rest of 2018 as they have committed to do, Trinidad and Tobago stands in the fortuitous position of obtaining at least $10 per barrel more on petroleum, on oil, crude, than was budgeted for. And I will link that to some of the measures coming down to the end, the amendment to the Central Bank Act. Because what that means to me is that the cash flow problem of the government, which we are currently experiencing, may gradually dissipate come the various quarters when the energy companies begin to remit. So right now we are experiencing a cash flow problem. We are experiencing a situation of a quarter that has gone, but come January, March, and June, also September, it is expected that things would be a bit easier for the government. That does not mean, Madam President, that there is not a major deficit to handle. It's just that we have a breathing space at this time. The deficit warrants two actions. First, we need to continue to cut our expenditure to the best of our ability, and I am sure the Honorable Minister of Finance is working assiduously with all line ministries to determine where, in fact, we can cut so that the public interest may not be injured. But at the same time, I am sure she is looking out to see where revenue is being lost throughout various arms of the state, even in droplets. Because, Madam President, we all know if we have a leaking tap, one drop at a time, and we put a bucket overnight, you would be sure that in the morning the bucket will be full. It is imperceptible. So we need to be looking at all areas of the state where the Honorable Minister is not receiving her share of revenue. In that way, we will be able, of course, to improve the social welfare in some way, not major, but for the quality of life of our people to be a little bit easier in 2018 than it was in 2017. And in that context, I want to link what I would like to focus on this particular finance bill. We are making decisions, but we are making decisions with incomplete information. Incomplete information with respect to, say, the Private Hospitals Act. The fines which were imposed somewhere in 1975. So we do need to revise. The question I would like to ask is this, and I don't know whether the minister has been apprised, how many prosecutions were conducted in 2016 for individuals who run private hospitals and who were in breach of the law? Was it a lot? Was it a little? And is it that we don't know, but we think that by increasing the fines, those who are prone to overcrowding the private hospitals, and that by that I imagine we would include also geriatric homes, they will face a hefty penalty, so it will be a deterrent. That kind of information will certainly allow us to understand the gravity of the situation. And also it will allow us, Madam President, to evaluate how successful the Ministry of Health is in investigating these homes to protect our geriatric citizens and individuals who are using the private hospital facilities. Because we do need to know that the regulatory arm of the ministries are working efficiently. So that bit of information, I am sure, would certainly help us in understanding why in a finance bill the government would want to amend the Private Hospitals Act and to increase the fees to the hefty sum, I think, of over $100,000 for overcrowding. That is just an administrative matter, Madam President. A more substantive one concerns this motor vehicles concession. We are offering major concessions to motor vehicles which are using CNG, as we should, because we have been trying to get usage of CNG to be increased for the longest while. One of the problems was that not many filling stations were in operation. So I'm hoping we would be able to amend that particular problem. We do need to have the filling stations. The others is all electric cars. I don't know what measures are being put in place to ensure that we have a number of stations where the all electrics can plug in and recharge quickly, or whether in fact we are hoping that they can recharge at home. Many homes would need to be rewired to recharge their cars, and also the hybrids, a combination of the two. That is fine. It is where the world is going. But my concern, Madam President, is that when this matter arose last year in the 2016 finance bill, it was based on environmental concerns. It was based upon a concern to protect the environment. And I asked myself the following question. Was the EMA, the Environmental Management Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, involved in an activity where it will advise the government of the Republic on the hierarchy of environmental concerns in Trinidad and Tobago? I am not sure, but certainly the EMA Act mandates the EMA to tell the government what the environmental concerns are and to work with all arms of the state to ensure that we could minimize environmental degradation. I would have thought that a major environmental concern was the PET bottles, the plastic soft drink and water bottles in Trinidad and Tobago. The minister, in piloting the finance bill, indicated that there was a collection of some 24,000 tires in a vicinity. Seems like a lot. But I'd imagine if we went and we collected plastic bottles, we would get maybe 24 million. Because whenever we see the watercourses being cleared in the dry season, and I'm sure the Ministry of Local Government is working very hard to ensure that the watercourses are cleared, we always see at the side of the road huge mounds of these plastic bottles. I would have thought that it would be cheaper for the government to look at the legislation governing the production and the disposal of these plastic bottles. It's called the Beverage Containers Bill, and would seek to implement that, maybe even charge a 25 cents per bottle charge, as we are doing with the tires, to which I'm coming. So that if we could put a charge on the plastic bottles and have the manufacturers of the bottles themselves, who are earning huge profits at the expense of the society, what happens, Madam President, is this. They earn their profits selling their beverages, and the waste disposal becomes a public policy problem. And so I would like to internalize it. In economics, it's called an externality. I'd like to internalize that externality and to have the manufacturers themselves be responsible for the collection of their waste. And if we are able to do that, I am sure we will go a long way protecting the environment at minimum cost, in fact, at revenue to the government. 25 cents for every PET bottle, plastic bottle, will result, I think, in a good inflow to the Minister of Finance in these difficult times. And at the same time, there is the movement in the CARICOM countries, Haiti and Guyana, to ban styrofoam. These are the poorest countries wanting to protect their environment. I think it's a measure we should also be considering. And it's a measure, Madam President, which is going to impose no cost and will add revenue to the consolidated fund. But when I see the vehicles concession on these environmentally friendly vehicles, see, I ask myself whether the EMA advised that it is air quality in Trinidad that is the problem and not the clogging of the watercourses and flooding. From casual observation, again, I need the information. See, casual observation, I think there is a major problem with the clogging of the watercourses. My colleague, the Minister of Local Government, I am sure, when he went about in the Southland looking at the flooded areas, would have seen mounds of plastic bottles causing blockages. And, Madam President, any of us who have visited Mayaro Beach on a rainy day would see the rivulets coming down into the beach, and they're bringing with them what they have accumulated inland. Plastic cups, plastic bottles, and it's coming to clog the beaches. So that this is an area to look at in environmental control that we have not been focusing on. It will cost little money, and I think it will really benefit many citizens in Trinidad and Tobago who are prone to flooding. Not that it is the panacea, of course, but it is a major culprit. And with respect to the vehicles, which are now experiencing the following: no motor vehicles tax for vehicles up to a particular size. It used to be, Madam President, in the old days, that concessions were given to agricultural vehicles. If you purchase a tractor or a pickup truck or any vehicle that was devoted or dedicated to agriculture, one of those panel vans, to transport your produce, you were given the types of concessions that I am seeing now. When I see these concessions, I ask myself, how much revenue is the Minister of Finance foregoing by these measures? It would have been good to know that based upon traditional consumption patterns, we expect so many cars to be imported, and if we did not have these measures, we would be collecting X dollars in revenue, and we are foregoing so much now. Again, data, information. I am being presented with a bill, and I don't know what the impact on the minister's revenue flow is going to be in an environment where she has to handle a huge deficit, and she is moving towards the Central Bank Act in order to provide some assistance. And I'm asking, why go there so far? We needed to get an estimate. I'm sure the Ministry of Finance would have provided an estimate. The measures expire in 2020, but between 2018, 19, and 20, we have 3 years of concessions that I think the country can ill afford. And when we are looking at the value-added tax amendment, I am seeing, Madam President, that these machines for commercial uses as well, and commercial use will involve not only the trucks that are used to transport goods to and from factory to depots, but it will include as well a maxi taxi, because that's a commercial vehicle, that's not a private vehicle. So we are looking at a lot of vehicles. We are providing the concessions, and we are not being told, the Parliament is not being told what the cost is in these difficult times. So what I'd like to raise to the Honorable Minister is this. All of us are concerned with the environment. There isn't anyone who is not concerned about environmental degradation. The hillsides, quarrying, flooding, the use of plastic bottles and so on. And we have to be looking in public policy, especially when the public finances are so weak. What is the cheapest, most economical way that we have that we could use, Madam President, to minimize environmental damage? I think the government has gone on a very expensive way to achieve a laudable objective, but could it have been done cheaper? And I come to this issue of the tax on the tires. I too checked the code 2012-00, 2012-10, and 90, and these tires are really foreign use tires, some of which are purchased to be used in cars. They probably have some life in them, and some of them are purchased to retread. I did not know that there was a retreading industry still in Trinidad and Tobago, but I suspect there is. I don't know how many, again, data of all the tires imported in, I am sure the customs would have the data, of all the tires imported in 2016. By now, they should tell us 10% was a used tire, 90% was a tire that was new. And so we are evaluating a measure without knowing how effective it will be with respect to the pollution caused by tires. And on that basis, I'm sure the information is there. It's important to evaluate it to know how valuable it is. Is it such a great problem that we do need to place it in a finance bill, or is it a minor problem? I concur with Senator Mark. Why don't we put an environmental tax on all tires? A $20 tax, I certainly will support that, but at the same time, establish a relationship, you see, a vertical relationship. Tires constitute, I don't know if the government is aware, tires constitute a valuable ingredient in cement manufacture. India has tried to use tires to generate power, and the problem was more pollution. When you burn that tire to generate electricity, you are poisoning the atmosphere. On the other hand, there are countries, United States, Europe, etc., where Tires are used, I imagine the process is they are shredded, cut, and they are put into cement manufacture, and you provide a stronger cement. I would recommend that the government consider seriously a $20 tax on all tires. And an agreement with, we are fortunate. We don't have to put these tires in a container and send them to a Mexican cement plant. We have a cement plant here. Could we establish an arrangement with our cement company to begin to use this tire as part of the ingredient that they will use in the production of this commodity? You see, Madam President, once we think environmental in that way, it is collecting so that whenever I take my old tires into the shop to get a new one, they should give me a rebate, maybe a $10 rebate, and they will take the old tires and then they will pass it on to the cement company, and the cement company at minimum pollution will be able to convert it into a usable item called cement. I think if we do that, we are going to address our environmental concerns in a much more holistic manner. And this is not, the technology is there. It is not something that we cannot implement. For example, I see no tax on lead-acid batteries, the batteries of cars. The reason for that is we have a number of individuals in the country who pass around buying the batteries from you because they recycle the batteries. It is known that the lead in the batteries, the lead is recycled. And today, 98% in the United States of all lead used in batteries return to batteries. Only 2% of the lead is lost along the way. So that there are critical things we could do, Madam President. Again, I am always mindful and concerned about the impact on the public purse. So this position on the automobiles, it arose last year, it is coming back this year. I am asking myself, the government, you see, I'm trying to look at the consistency in public policy. They lowered the VAT rate from 15% to 12.5%, expanded the base. And in expanding the base, you included a lot of basic food items, school books. And now I see in the finance bill, Madam Minister, through you, Madam President, I see value-added tax is being removed from some of these automobiles. I ask myself, is it our objective to broaden the VAT base or to narrow the base? If our objective was to broaden the base, what I would have recommended was this. Exempt the cars from the motor vehicles tax. But when it comes to the VAT, I could have a dual VAT. I will say, well, in the gasoline-type cars, the VAT remains 12.5%, and in these electric cars, the VAT would be 6%, but I will not go down to 0. Quite within the ambit of government, they could consider that, but to remove the VAT is sending a signal to me that the owners of cars are being given a concession that the buyers of food are not, and I am concerned about, really, the poor and the underprivileged and the impact it will have on them. There are many things to be said, you know. The Minister of Finance has to raise her revenue. And I'm wondering, is she not tying her hands by putting so many commodities now, not only exempt from motor vehicle tax, but also exempt from the VAT? I would like really to see the VAT base broaden. Lower the rate to 10% and broaden everything. But we are eliminating the VAT. So I think she would, in her winding up, be able to explain what the policy is with respect to VAT in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, I think the Minister of Finance also has to be looking at where revenue is being lost. As I alluded to, that dripping tap. As I speak, there are agencies of the state which collect payments from the public using cash. They're not using links machines. I will come to more on the links. They're not using machines, Madam President. And the problem with cash, especially at a place like the Caroni Transport Office, is that cash is both liquid and solid. We've heard the term the solid liquid cash, coined by famous presenter from Mastana Bahar a long time. It was solid liquid cash. It was solid, you could hold it, but liquid it could run. I think the Minister of Finance, through the Minister of Public Administration, would want to ensure that everywhere agencies of the state collect cash, we now make payments electronic. We cannot say We have a transport system where we are moving towards RFID and all of these fancy technical things. And when you go to pay your license, you have to walk with $1,000. That $1,000, and I would like to know when the last time an internal audit was done in the licensing office to find out. We have issued so many driver's licenses. We expect so much money in exchange. If there's a difference, where did it go? So the Minister of Transport, I'm sure, could stop me anytime to tell me when a links machine is going to be implemented. And by way of comparison, Madam President, I applied for a passport at the Frederick Street office of Passport Office, and they had their links machine. So it cannot be that it is not possible in some areas, but possible in other areas of the government. So we do need to plug those areas and ensure that all the funds which belong to the consolidated fund through the Minister of Finance actually goes there. It is this, you see, this crisis is presenting to us a valuable opportunity. It cannot be business as usual with respect to revenue collections. It cannot be that we are allowing so much drips along the way. You see, when water is free, you can allow leaks, but when you have to pay for it, you will be plugging it very quickly. Madam President, enough said on that. Let me focus on this issue of the dual corporate tax rate. Much has been said about the dual corporate tax rate. The reality is governments are free to alter their tax structure as they see fit. There is no rule, certainly with respect to the corporate sector, to say that you need one corporate tax rate of 25%. If a government wishes to promote the hospitality industry as we have in the past, they can have a rate for the hospitality, a bona fide hospitality industry, or a biotech firm that is much lower than the existing corporate tax rate, so that it is within the ambit of government to do that. You can also, as a government, impose a rate, which and the Canadian government has done that for the first $1 million, you can, more like a progressive rate, not a flat tax. The rate is X. Corporations earning between $1 million and $5 million will pay a higher rate and so on. So it can be graded. What we have done is, instead of providing a concessionary rate to, I'll say, the hotel sector, we have, in fact, imposed a higher rate on corporations doing banking business, 35%. And let us see the impact on that rate. Suppose the banks as a whole just earn $100 in profit. That's a model we're using. Under the old regime, they will pay $30 to the minister. They keep $70 for themselves and for all their other businesses. Now the rate is 35%. If profits remain at 100, the banks will forward $35 to the minister, keep $65 for themselves. But you see, that is based upon a big if. If profits remain at 100, let us understand the banking structure. Banks are tight oligopolies in Trinidad and Tobago. That is, there are about 5 of them. We have a number of agencies doing banking business, and I'm coming to the recommendations, but we have maybe 4 or 5 banks. We have a few of them that are not really large and so on. And when you are dealing with a tight oligopoly structure, there is something known as market power. When you have market power, you could be sure the monopoly elements in there will want to see profits not remain at $100, but will cause profits to rise to 110. So if profits now rise at 110, Madam President, and the tax rate is 35%, what happens is that the bank ends up with $71.50, as opposed in the old regime, it had $70. How can a bank or someone doing banking business cause his or her profit to rise from $100 to $110 in the course of a year? Madam President, there are transactions fees. There is links and credit card fees. There are account fees, savings account fees. There are forex fees, and we have overdraft fees, and a miscellany of fees. That has been the problem with colleagues of mine on this bench. We have seen an area where the banks, Madam President, can impose, because of oligopoly, because of tight oligopoly, because of the market structure, we have seen where banks in this country can raise their fees. And it's not as if one raises its fee and the others keep, it seems as though they float in a band. And these fees can rise. When we look at banking fees, I understand, I'll be looking at the figures very carefully because I understand some $1 billion of fees were raised in the banking sector last year. Senator Small, I'm sure, will have more up-to-date figures. And so, Madam President, the problem I have is this. In economics, it's known as tax incidence. You see, what does tax incidence say? It says that he upon whom the tax is levied may not be the one who ultimately pays the tax if he can pass it on. And you pass on a tax, the incidence of a tax is directly related to the competitiveness of the industry. In a competitive industry, where the moment you move your fee a little bit, you lose business, it is the individual upon whom you have levied who will have to pay in large measure. But in a concentrated industry, tight oligopoly, as long as there's an opportunity to pass on, you would be sure that gradually you would find the institutions raising their fees because they have the power to so do. And Madam President, I have before me the Central Bank Act. And the minister is amending a couple of sections. I will come to those sections when I'm concluding. But I really don't think, Madam President, it is going to be right, fair, and just, and defending the public interest from the independent bench, to know what these companies are liable to do, and without taking the necessary evasive action so that the public interest may not be injured. I quote Section 44A of the Central Bank Act. It says, and this was fixing of interest rates amended in 1994, the bank, that is the central bank, may fix the maximum and minimum interest rates payable on deposits received, and may fix the maximum and minimum interest rates, fees, and charges to be levied on loans, advances, or other credit facilities by a financial institution. I would recommend for the Honorable Minister the following small, tiny amendment that will protect the public interest. It says that after the bank may fix the maximum and minimum interest rates payable on deposits received, and may fix the maximum and minimum interest rates, fees, and charges to be charged on loans, advances, and other services. Madam President, if the Honorable Minister can simply add "and other services," 3 words to this 44A, the central bank will then have the power to look at the maximum and the minimum. Right now, the law as currently written does, and there's a loophole. Let us protect the public interest. We need to do that. 3 words, and I am sure the Honorable Minister will get the necessary legal advice on if my 3 words "and other services" do not make much legal sense. It makes a lot of economic sense, but the legal drafters "and other services," it will not be too difficult to come to this honorable house and get a lot of support. I can't guarantee unanimous support, but you certainly will get the support of Senator Mahabir, and I may be able to speak for Senator Small, because we need to be able to regulate. Madam President, if we don't, market power. The problem you see with the banking sector is this. They do it because of the structure. Not that they are evil, wicked, malicious, or bad. No, it's the market power The market structure allows them to do that. And there's a line of least resistance. You see, if there is, what I'm talking about is regulation to control excessive pricing power. What we can have as an alternative, Madam President, is this: competition. Competition from whom I have called for it before. If every single credit union in Trinidad and Tobago were to start to accept deposits and to have an ATM machine, I can see all the credit unions coming together to run ATM machines. So everywhere you go, everywhere I go, I see gambling machines now. You could have ATM machines by the Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago. And you could be able, for 25 cents or so, to withdraw cash, because to run an ATM machine is expensive. To maintain it is costly. There has to be a fee charged. But I think we need not only to get the beverages containers bill to protect the public interest, but you see that credit union bill? Once we are able to get that, it provides countervailing power to the banks, and we would be able to regulate as we see fit. Madam President, I'm seeing some looks. I don't know how much time I have, but I have a fair amount to say, you know. Madam President, let me continue until I am stopped. There is this issue of lottery winnings. The reality is this: gambling is neither moral nor immoral, good nor bad. It is what is done. In every activity in my business, we do not judge. We simply say, can we regulate so we can minimize harm? So I see a tax on lottery winnings, again, information that is not available. I don't know, for example, how much of NLCB's earnings are paid out. Is it 10%, 20%? In Nevada, where gambling is tightly regulated, there is a rule which says in the casinos, 98% of what they take in on a periodic basis, daily or weekly, must be paid out. The machines are so calibrated. The casino is given a 2% to run its operations and to earn a profit. NLCB confuses me. I do not know. You see, I am called upon to support a measure with incomplete information. Madam President, we have games. I don't play them because economists never gamble. Whenever I play, Madam President, the horses, I do put $5.
Senator Mahabir, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I never put $5 on a horse to win. I put $5 on a horse to place. Even if everybody says this horse will win. No. That horse will have to place. He has to place, because at least I'll get back a little 50 cents. I don't like to lose money. And I like the fun of buying a little ticket and so on. But Madam President, what we need to do is this with the National Lotteries Control Board. We need to understand that it's a valuable arm of the state which can and should generate considerable revenues. And I don't know how much Playway generates in profits to the Minister of Finance. I don't know how much a lotto generates. When I check the Canadian jurisdiction and states such as New Jersey and so on, I know exactly how much each game generates as revenue for the government of the state. I know exactly what the administrative costs are. Say $1 million is taken in by a game on a particular week. How much of that is paid out? How much of that actually is administrative expenses? What are the contractual arrangements which exist between the providers of these scratch tickets and the electronic format and the NLCB itself? I think if we were to look at NLCB and we were to streamline it and look at international norms, maybe again we are taxing only the earnings and not the takings. And I think we should be looking at how much NLCB takes. It's all computerized. We ought to know how much people in Trinidad and Tobago wagered in 2017. All of that should be recorded. How much was paid out, how much was given to the government, and how much was used to run operations. I can't remember the last time that I saw one of those audited results of NLCB. I think the Minister of Finance should be looking at one of those. Madam President, I know time is against me, but the Central Bank Act and the Treasury Bills Act, again, I ask myself, we are amending them, but is it really necessary at this time? Treasury bills are really bills issued by the central bank, but they belong to the minister, the Treasury. She has to find resources to service them. The same thing from the central bank. We don't want, Senator Mark alluded to, monetizing the deficits, increasing the money supply, causing inflationary problems, pressures on it. I won't go there. That's another area. But I'm asking myself, when the government presented its budget a couple months ago, the environment was such that we were anticipating a major cash flow problem for the year. $52. I am telling you, once the Minister of Energy can ensure that we're up to around 75,000 barrels per day in 2018, we can't get to 80,000. I know that's being very, very optimistic. But if we can get 75,000 barrels, we are almost sure of getting something like $60 a barrel averaging on oil at 58 WTI and 65 Brent. And the agreement seems to be holding, so that I'm wondering whether the cash flow problem of the government, and is it absolutely necessary at this time, given the heavy debt that we have to pay, is it necessary that we are going to have to amend the law for something that may not be needed? Because the minister is amending the Central Bank Act because she anticipates that in certain quarters we are going to need additional advances, and these advances, Madam President, are temporary. Yeah, they are temporary, and they are going to have to be repaid on an annual basis. The Treasury bills will have to be repaid. The problem, as I see it, Madam President, is while we are amending the Central Bank Act, I don't think it would be necessary in 2018. We should amend the Act very carefully. In any event, the Act I would want to see amended is the Act concerning the services charged by banks. Madam President, I know time is up. I thank you once again for the opportunity to address this honorable chamber.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam President, I rise to join this debate on the Finance Bill, an act to provide for the variation of certain duties and taxes, and to introduce provisions of a fiscal nature and for related matters. This bill seeks to amend the following pieces of legislation, as is listed here in the explanatory notes. I will just read them out for the records. Private Hospital Act, Chapter 2903. The Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850, the Income Tax Act, Chapter 7501, the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506, the Miscellaneous Taxes Act, Chapter 7701, the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, and the Central Bank Act, Chapter 7902. But Madam President, I had some notes here to speak on CNG, renewables, and that, and I will speak about it later in my presentation. But let me deal with, in particular, the presentation of Senator Mark. He gets up here and pontificates about what the PNM is doing and what, not what we are doing, what we are forced to do. And let me just take this story from the top. The cash flow crisis and the revenue crisis we face in this country is largely a result of significant decline in petroleum revenue. Everybody says it here. Every time somebody gets up, they say it. And 9 out of 10 times, we attribute it to two causes. One, decline in production, both in terms of oil and gas. As Senator Mahabir said, we were in the late 60s. In 2016, Senator West, 68 or something, 2000, Right now we are on 73 and we're climbing. Gas production has fallen. Everybody knows we're in what we call a gas curtailment scenario where we about 700 to 800 MMCF per day short. But there are plans in place to regularize that. The second point we attribute to the decline in revenue is falling commodity prices. Under the UNC, oil price averaged over their period $93 a barrel. Most years it was above $100 a barrel. Gas price was $5, $6. Right now it's down to $2.60, $2.70. Luckily, we getting an upward movement in oil prices, so we at 57, 58 for WTI, 63, sometimes 64 for Brent. But I want the nation to know here today that that is not the only reason that we saw a 90% decline in petroleum revenue. And the third and most, probably in my humble opinion, most important reason that nobody speaks about, and everybody seems to be hiding from it, is the tax allowances that were given to the oil companies. Because oil price could be as high as it wants. The state gets revenue from two sources in the petroleum sector: royalties and taxes. Royalties is only imposed on oil. That is why that 12.5% royalty on gas is so fundamental to the extraction of state economic rent for a depleting asset. The very fact that BP's tax liability in 2014 was several $1 billion, that went down to $300 million in 2016, is because of the tax write-offs that were given to the oil companies. Let me explain it to you. On exploration costs, they were given 100% write-off in the year of expenditure. Having said that, the oil companies claim they didn't have need to use it. But that has a sunset clause. It will end in December 2017. But there's another tax benefit that nobody speaks about. On the development cost side, and Senator Small could bear me out here, the depreciation or the write-offs you had, development cost is divided into two sections: tangibles and intangibles. On the tangible side, the write-offs were 20% in the first year and 20% thereafter on the declining balance. On the intangible side, the write-offs were 10% in the first year and 20% on the declining balance every year after. You know what the UNC went and did? After giving 100% write-off for expenditure in exploration in the year it was expended, 50% write-off in the first year, 30% in the second year, and 20% in the third year. You're writing it off in 3 years. A company, obviously in a scenario like that, will have minimal petroleum profit tax liability. That's the story that has not been told. And that's the story I want the country to understand here today. Granted, lower commodity prices. Granted, decline in production. But this hits you where it hurts the most. And you come here and pontificate as if the PNM is doing something wrong. It's the PNM who say no, that you cannot produce the gas in this country without paying royalty, just like petroleum, oil. It's the PNM who said, as Senator West said, we're going to revise the whole petroleum taxation legislation to bring it more in line with international standards. Bearing in mind that you need foreign capital investment to keep this industry alive. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, when you're dealing with a depleted and a wasting asset, the state has a right to extract economic rent on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And when Dr. Rowley went to Houston and he met with BP and Shell and EOG, he told them the very same thing. He said, you have shareholders, but I also have shareholders. And my shareholders are the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Senator Mark spoke about the overdraft limit from 15 to 20%. We didn't want to do that. We are forced to do that. They racked up the 15% limit. They were really running on fumes, you know. Running on fumes when they had substantially more revenue. When the highest revenue earned in this country outside a 2008 peak was in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. And having that significant revenue, they just racked up expenditure. Depleted the overdraft of 15%. It had reached 90-something% when Minister Imbut said they had 2 days more to survive. Added to which they raided the NGC. In that same period, you know. And here's what the argument is: not 16 billion, it's 12. It's plenty billions, let me tell you. And in any event, added to that, they took a series of short-term loans, billion-dollar loans for T&Tech, for UDCOT, for the OAS Highway. When we came into office, we had to refinance 6 months loan, you know, $1 billion 6-month instrument, and then have to put it into longer instruments. This is what we met, you know. And even in that scenario there, we're talking about increasing the limit on borrowing. They took the debt to GDP rate to 63%. If there has ever been wastage and mismanagement in this country, it was under the UNC for 10%. And you have to understand what
had cause earlier to remind members of Standing Order 51-1 ENF. This is my second reminder. Okay?
And let me talk to the young senators. Sit down and listen and learn. Okay? Take a lesson in the economic history of Trinidad as the PNM. No, I'm not telling you. You'll have your turn.
When you get up.
So would you allow me to read it?
When you get up to talk, you'll correct me.
Don't lie to the population.
No, we don't use those words here.
Senator Obika, I just reminded members about the standing order, but you have gone beyond that. Yes. Continue, Minister.
So, Madam President, I just wanted to put the record straight. This country is in a serious crisis. It calls for matured hands and matured minds and matured hearts to run it. We have to balance our cash flow. We have to balance revenue and expenditure. We have to balance our social services net. We still have to send our children to school. We still have to fund the school feeding program. We still have to pay disability allowance. We still have to pay old age pension. We still have to support the public service. Where's the mass retrenchment? We're looking at the state sector, and we're managing all that with the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Coleman Booth, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Minister of Works, Minister of Public, the whole cabinet is totally aligned on this matter. And it hurts me. It genuinely does. When I come here and hear all this loose talk. I don't want to refer to the House and anti-gang legislation and stuff. I know you'll pull me up for that. But that it all gravitates to a mindset of the United National Congress that disappoints me at the highest level. I say no more on that. So, Madam President, I will now get down to my notes. My presentation will largely be on the issue of hybrids, CNG, the environmental tax on tires and what have you, because green is in. But I just want to make some other corrections on that. I'll do it shortly. The minister in the Ministry of Finance explained what this bill is doing with regards motor vehicle tax and VAT with regards when we inadvertently had luxury vehicles coming in. We cut it down to 1599 cc's for passenger vehicles. The whole ambit remains for commercial vehicles. The environmental tire tax, I mean, and let me comment, like her, the minister of my replacement in the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, because that was a phenomenal exercise in the National Cleanup Campaign. He saved this country $134 million. And how much thousand tires? 24,000 tires. But whether you dump 24,000 tires in a landfill, it's bad. You dump it in a stream, it is worse. You dump it by the side of the road, it is doubly worse. So we have to start to talk serious technology now to transform municipal waste into something. I'll deal with that shortly. I'll deal with clean energy, especially as it relates to CNG and power generation, and our drive towards renewables, which is really a drive to solar, wind, and or any form of renewable energies. But let me take it from the top, Madam President. Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory to the Paris Agreement. It is hoped that we will be ratifying that agreement very, very shortly. It's currently before Cabinet. Under the Paris Agreement, Trinidad and Tobago is committed to three things: to reduce total greenhouse gases emission by 15% by the year 2030. A subset of that is to reduce transportation emission by 30% by 2030, and to produce 10% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2021. It'll be a hard stretch for that, but we're trying our best, and I'll show you. Because the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world are power generation, in particularly coal, and in transportation fuels. And today, I just want to make a boost here in Trinidad. Last month, I was in Bolivia at a gas exporting countries forum heads of state meeting. And in my delivery there, I said something that countries hardly know. Of all, while technically natural gas is a fossil fuel, it is the cleanest of the fossil fuel by far. Because I asked the question in Bolivia, what is the purpose of having an electric car? And let me talk to Senator Raful. I know she likes this language. What is the purpose of an electric car if your electricity is generated from coal? Because the damage has already been done. So your first port of call is, at a minimum, in electricity generation, convert or make an attempt to convert to renewables and or natural gas. And Madam President, through you, Trinidad and Tobago is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that generates 100% of its power from natural gas. We have the distinction of being the only country in the entire Western Hemisphere that generates 100% of its electricity from natural gas. We have the distinction of only 5 countries in the world that generates all its power from natural gas. And they are Turkmenistan, Qatar, Bahrain, Trinidad and Tobago, and Brunei. That's where we stand internationally. Proud of it. Every conference I go to, I say that. And then, let me just call the countries that are in the 90s, which is 90+% of the power generated from natural gas. The United Arab Emirates, powerful Arab state, 98%, so we pipped them by 2. Belarus, Russian gas though, 98%. Oman, 97.4%. Singapore, 95.3%. Tunisia, 94.2%. Azerbaijan, 93.9% or 94%. And that's where we are. And let me share with you some other startling statistics. In countries such as Belgium, the United States, Australia, Morocco, Spain, Germany, Portugal, the Philippines, and Venezuela, the percentage of electricity produced from natural gas is low and ranges from 10 to 30%. So the great United States is under 30% of their power generation. Coal is king. And I don't want to get into their politics, but coal is still king under the, you know what. There are many nations in the world today where coal and other forms of energy continue to be a major source of electricity generation rather than natural gas. And here are the countries that are less than 10%. India, China, Poland, Finland, and Canada. So when people tell you Trinidad has this big greenhouse gas footprint, it is largely because of Point Lisas. Okay? And then that is on a per capita basis. Okay? But not in terms of volume, because it's not per capita that destroys the greenhouse effect and cause global warming. It's the cumulative amount that comes from China, India, Russia, and the United States of America, and largely Western Europe. But let me just share some information now on our trust into CNG. Madam President, in 2014, there were 1,522 CNG vehicles in Trinidad. In 2017, a mere 3 years, that figure is now 3,000, virtually a 100% increase. And I have to make the point at this juncture that CNG could have never taken the leap that is taken, and I'll show you what plans we have for CNG, had we not to remove the subsidy on diesel and super gasoline. Because you cannot compete with a subsidized product. So once diesel remained at $1.50 TT cents per liter, CNG didn't stand a chance. We didn't move the subsidy just for CNG. We moved it because of the total fiscal environment. But having said that, it is what will make CNG now pay. Because Minister Imbert quoted something in the House about it is virtually minimal cost for the maxi taxi industry if they convert to run a proper business. By 2020, based on our estimated conversion rate, we expect to have 19,000 CNG vehicles in Trinidad and Tobago.
Minister,
That, Madam President,
will
is
you
an
give way to
accomplishment.
clarify? Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Minister. With respect to CNG, Minister, the problem has always been CNG filling stations.
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
Right,
yeah.
you're coming to that. Thank you.
With the 19,000 vehicles, this will result in a displacement of 10%, or 100 million liters of liquid fuels per annum. That in itself is a cost saving of 180 million TT dollars. Added to the environmental positivity that it brings to the firm. On the CNG saving side, the equivalent cost of CNG is $1 TT per liter. Diesel is now $3.41. Super is now $3.97. Premium is $5.75. Good? You're paying for your conversion in 2 years or less. So I now come to Senator Dhanayshwar's point on filling stations. But before I go there, I just want to quote some other incentives that the state has for CNG that is really not the subject of this bill, but I just want to put it on the record. At 25 for fiscal incentive to encourage conversions, 25% tax credit on the cost of converting a vehicle to use CNG up to a conversion limit of $10,000 per vehicle. Well, you all heard VAT and motor vehicle tax exemption on OEM CNG vehicles purchased, that's new vehicles. For commercial, there's a capital uplift of 130% for wear and tear allowance on the cost of converting a vehicle to use CNG. On school buses, there's a VAT and motor vehicle tax exemption for OEM CNG vehicles purchased, which the Minister already said. And fiscal incentives included capital uplift of 130% for wear and tear allowances on the cost of plant, machinery, and equipment needed to provide UNC installation. So the companies that are providing the conversion kits and installing it for you, they have a 130% capital uplift allowance on their plant and equipment. Now we move to, which is really a challenge. You can't tell people, convert to CNG, buy CNG, tax allowance for CNG, no VAT on CNG, but no CNG to put in a vehicle. I mean, that's a paradox of class. So, as we speak, Madam President, there are 13 CNG stations in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, obviously, we do not have any CNG solamente. It's a mixed basket of liquid fuels and CNG. But CNG is available at St. Christopher's, PTSC, the BTAM, that's the service station on the BTAM, Ramco in Trin City, Peaks in Tacarigua, Brentwood, which is a Uniped station in Chaguanas, at the NGC warehouse in Carousel, San Fernando, in Rushford Street, San Fernando, in Point Fortin, in Tumpuna. That's a new station that was just recently opened in Arima there. And recently, I think last month, I opened a station in Diego Martin with CNG capacity. So we're getting there. There's portable CNG now, which we're trying to optimize. We'll be carrying a portable station to Tobago in the interim until we can build a permanent station in Tobago, because one of the advantages of Tobago, even Tobago is gas-driven turbines, you know, because Mr. Manning had the vision when he was Prime Minister, to run a line from Angus to a field in northeast Trinidad to Cove Estate in Tobago. So that today the Cove Estate is powered by natural gas. And that CNG station there will do us very well. And the thing I like to talk about, so let me talk about it again one time. We are going to build a flagship station at the famous Presal roundabout. But let me repeat for the umpteenth time in the Senate. When you go down to Presal, or Cuva roundabout, or Cuva interchange, or Cuva, you see something there that I call a monstrosity. Madam President, that cost.
It's not 10 million to build a route to AMV.
That cost was $30 million. For several things looking like water tanks and some solar lighting. $30 million was given to a subsidiary of SIS to build that.
Who's that?
Now, here what we are going to do. We are going to build a flagship CNG station at the Cuva interchange, because that is the home of the gas sector. You're moving into Riverlet Road on your way to Point Lisas. And a flagship station, and here what the flagship station will have. 10 CNG dispensing points to fill all classes of vehicles. Cars, maxi taxis, trucks, and buses. At least 5 liquid fuel dispensing points for gasoline and diesel to fill all classes of vehicles. And mini convenience stores. Up to 5 cabanas for quick food outlets, an ATM machine, public washrooms, and 24/7 operation. And Madam President, I'm pleased to announce today that this project is going to cost this administration $10.2 million. Look at the kit. Look at the kit you'll be getting for $10.2 million.
Compared to that.
Compared to $30 million.
What is that?
I had said once, when I became Minister of Energy, I was so confused as to what to do with that site. But NGC spent that money, that is part of the $12 billion raid, or the $16 billion, how you want to call it.
A raid is a raid.
I didn't know what to do. I said on a platform one day, I will make a contest with secondary school students to advise the minister as to what to do that, because it was totally confusing. When we finally distilled everything, we felt it would have been opportune because it's a nice intersection, what have you. There's egress and ingress, yeah, to the site. Plus, there's another issue about fuel dispensing in Trinidad, because and that's a different point, not for today's debate, is that the retail marketing sector didn't evolve with a new network grid in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have from the lighthouse in Sealots to where the highway ends in Penal. There's only one service station in Beetham and one in Brentwood. And that is where 50% of the vehicles of the country passes every day. So that Cuva flagship station is a well thought out project, and it should begin shortly. And Madam President, I make my final point on renewables. While gas-powered turbines is the cleanest of the fossil fuels, we are still committed under Paris for renewables. For those, you'll see an ad on the newspaper from the Ministry of Energy, which states investment opportunity in Trinidad and Tobago for grid-integrated renewable energy power generation. Okay, so we'll go for public expression of interest for utility-scale power plants that could be either solar and or wind, up to 3 megawatts, we'll have to pass new legislation for feeding into the national grid. That comes under the TNTEC Act. And we're positioning ourselves now as a country to get into renewables. Solar has its challenges, its footprint is fairly large. You need big land spaces to have major solar farms. Wind, there have been some preliminary studies on the East Coast in particular and the Southeast Coast, where it is felt that there's enough wind capacity there coming from the Northeast Trades. And you know there's nothing between Mayaro and Africa. So there's a lot of wind generation there that we think could give you utility scale plants. We have had some unsolicited proposals from some major companies in terms of that. But again, we decided not to have a sole selective process in this regard. And we decided to go out for public tender for utility scale that we can be doing. To come back to the tires and the beverage container bill, a tender closed at the end of October for a waste-to-energy project that will be sited at the BTAM, okay, where we'll be converting municipal waste of all types into energy and into power to be sold on the TNTEC grid. I think that will go a long way, and the Minister of Public Utilities, when the appropriate legislation comes, if it's the beverage container bill or what, he will speak about what Simcol is doing on recycling and all these sort of issues. So, Madam President, we are fairly well positioned in terms of Paris. We are fairly well positioned in terms of the conversion into the green century, as I like to call it. You have to just join the bandwagon. Good? Every time I meet an ambassador or a high commissioner from Europe in particular, that's the only thing they come to talk about, you know. The European Union is the people who are doing the roadmap for us now on renewables. But every single ambassador out of the EU, when they pay courtesy calls on the minister, that takes up 60 or 70% of their agenda. They're big into renewables, and I think it is a step in the right direction. It's one planet, planet Earth. Yeah. And that, I think, is where the country has to go. We can do what we want at the policy level, but I call on Trinidadians that there are some attitudinal changes that has to take place. You have to be more conscious that you're in a fragile ecosystem. You go to Europe, and whether it's the Seine or the Volga or whatever river, it's clean. You do not see a paper cup or a plate or nothing like that. I was in Moscow a couple of months ago. Even the Moscow River, passing through the heart of Moscow, I just trying to see if I could see any paper cup or thing, and there's nothing. When you come here, when the rain falls and the Go Martin River and the St. Anne's River and thing washes down, the whole of down the islands full up of junk. Good, we just have to get more conscious. And look at the environment we have. Look at the wetlands we have in Caroni, in the river, in the Overpooch Lagoon, in plantations, in Tobago. Good. Look at the Northern Range. You go on a hike in the Northern Range, and any waterfall you're going to, you see the paper cup. It escapes nowhere. For years, going up in Mayaro, I used to tell people, why come to Mayaro for? Because all they live in there is garbage. When I was a member of Parliament for Mayaro, I used to say, I want those local tourists to come there. Because they buy nothing, they bring the drinks, the only thing they're buying is ice and chaser. And they're leaving garbage for the people to pick up. Yeah. So we have to change our attitude. Yeah. We have to become more environmental conscious. We have to stop littering. Yeah. We have to stop throwing fridges in the waterways. Trinidad is one of the few places in the world that in certain parts of Trinidad has a 7-day-a-week garbage collection system. For those